Now we are going to move to the next speaker in this panel. Okay, I'm going to introduce our next speaker. So let me introduce Dr. Elizabeth Zeitoun, okay, from Academia Sinica. And the title of her talk is Research and Teaching of Rukai and Kaxabu, two Formosan languages, a comparison between officially and non-officially endangered slash moribund languages in Taiwan. Dr. Elizabeth Zitton is research fellow at the Institute of Linguistics Academia Sinica. Her major research interests lie in Austronesian linguistics, morphosyntax, typology, and historical linguistics. She specialized in Rukai, Saisia, Tso, and has worked on many other Formosan languages. She has published a number of sketch grammars in Chinese and two major monographs on Rukai and Saisia. She has been an acting direct editor and later executive editor of Language and Linguistics from April 2008 through June 2013 is in one and is also one of the editors of the Handbook of Formosan Languages, the Indigenous Languages of Dr. Sidon, please take that book.
So before I start, I would like to thank the organizers of the conference, in particular Professor Iwasaki, for talking about two languages, but actually I followed exactly what we were being asked about introducing the languages and then talking about um, documentation, I mean, not only documentation, but about training and also about teaching. So I will be working the roadmap of this talk will be as follows. First, I will be introducing uh, the two languages I choose for this talk. Then I will be giving kind of an overview about their characteristics, and they're quite interesting, I think. Then I will be talking about my personal experience with these, on researching these languages and teaching or promoting uh, the revitalization of these languages. And then I will make this situation in Taiwan so much complicated, and for us linguists even more, I think, uneasy. Okay, so will be starting. When I was writing this paper, I've been writing a couple of these papers lately. I had to reconsider a couple of things. First, I'm working at Academia Sinica. I'm a researcher. So when I started doing training, maybe 26 years ago, I was always told that the findings, and I was always very much criticized. And that was a very delicate position where what should you do? You're working in a research institute, but at the same time, there are social issues that you need to answer. So it have led me to two different directions, the second of which I think has been imposed on me as we're living Taiwan history. So as I said, I'm a linguist, a researcher, been an advisor, mentor, and at the same time, we have contributions to make to the society. I have been an active participant in the formation of native speakers since 1997. I have been teaching a lot of classes on indigenous languages. I will ask this morning if I can teach in Chinese. Yes, I can. Um, I can. I can do it. I think quite well. And in terms, let me see. I've been working. Yes, on helping with national exams. And this since the early 2000, so it has been about 22, 23 years. At one time, we used to be, closed up in university, National Taiwan Normal University for about 5 days. So I had to listen to all the dialects, all the Formosan languages. First, I'm a witness at the forefront of the protection of these languages, and at the same time, seeing these languages actually disappearing in front of us. So let me start with the Formosan languages. Um, we are at the northern tip of these very big language family of about 1,200 languages. And I was thinking, wow, in Indonesia, they have 700 languages. How do they do it? We have only from a linguistics point of view, 15 languages. And I think it's already more than I can do, that can work all my life. We have 44 dialects. I must say that in some cases, the dialects are quite distinct. In some cases, they are very similar. In some cases, we don't know because the dialects variety has been lost completely. We have a dormant language. What does it mean? It used to be extinct in 1850, Sinica, but it was recovered. It was first recorded by the how do you say that? The Dutch, Hollandais, I forgot the name in
The
English.
Netherlands?
Yeah, Netherlands. And by missionaries, so 400 years ago, we're going to celebrate this year their arrival 400 years ago. It has been everyone who is learning this language will be able to pass it on the next generation. Then we have a couple of Western Plains language tribes that are completely extinct. Now, from a governmental point of view, there are 16 languages, 42 dialects, and some dialects are considered as really languages by the government, but we believe they are only dialects. And some languages, like Kaxabu, for example, are completely forgotten and unofficially unrecognized, not officially recognized. So just let me tell you why I wanted to work this time on Kaxabu and Rukai and give you some overview of these two languages. I work on quite a couple of number of languages. Most of the working of these languages was imposed on me. If I could have, I could have worked for a lifetime on the first language I started to work on. But I was asked each time I was starting to have some results on what language. I was imposed to start working on other languages. And I don't know why my colleagues, for example, working on Chinese can work on Chinese their whole life. This is something that was quite, I don't even understand. Anyway, though I have been working on so many different languages, actually, I have had different things. For example, on Saixia, I've been working, I have a whole 600 page on of the morphology, but I'm missing the teaching part. I have an assistant who is teaching, but I'm not teaching. I never saw her teaching. So this part was not, didn't fit the topic of this paper. So I decided I would talk about Rukai and I would talk about Kaxabu, a language I've been working for about 10 years now. So these two languages are completely different. Rukai has always been officially recognized, and it's now one of the 20 national language. There's no problem about it. Rukai is a very big, not big, but quite a group of people, about 12,000. In comparison, Kaxabu is next, that'd be 500. The language I'm going to talk about, they're not that many. Maybe in Rukai, in Rukai there are 6 mutually intelligible, unintelligible to some extent. For some of them they are intelligible, for some of them they're not intelligible. I think unintelligibility comes from 2 different factors. First, because they want to be one village, one kingdom, so they don't recognize the other people as Rukai. And the second one is because they don't learn their own language, so they can't understand what's going on in the other dog. So these are things going on. Kaxabu is very close to Pasai, and it has been heavily influenced by Southern Ming, while in Rukai, for example, we don't know yet the influence of Chinese. Rukai is quite a well-documented language, while Kaxabu has only been reported in 1968, and it was rediscovered in 2014. In the meantime, it was completely, forgotten by the linguists. Last but not least, yes, yes, I've been investigating Mandarin Rukai, the dialect I will be talking today since 1992. That means already 32 years, while I only worked on Kaxabu since 2014, and I did make the supervision of a student. So let me make a brief introduction on Mandarin and Rukai, and I think it will be quite quick, but you will get some, ideas about this tool. I think in August 1992, I was just starting working at Academia Sinica, and I was suddenly sent to I was working on Zo. So I expected I would go on working on Zo, and suddenly Professor Poli, academician at Academia Sinica, said, no, you're going to work on Mandarin. So I was, sent to that village, and I started to understand what was Rukai. It was a very small community. If in comparison to all the other big languages like Bunun, Taiwan, or Amis, where we have quite a couple of Rukai is quite different from all the other languages. So as I said, there are six dialects. They are not really, some of the speakers can understand each other's, others can't. And today we'll be talking about Mandarin. This group of dialects, they have been they are quite different from the other Formosan languages, but Mandarin, among all others, is completely different. It has spiritized, all these voice types have been weakened and spiritized. Syntactically, it has also vowel pronouns that tend to coalesce with the verb stem, and there's a verb-object agreement. All the Rukai dialects are extremely endangered, but I think the Budai dialect among these is one of the strongest, dialect among the Rukai. Mandarin is quite endangered, and I will explain why. So it has 15 consonants, 4 vowels, no glide, and it has quite a simple syllable structure. You have CD, CDD, B, and it all ends up in open syllables at the end of the word. That stress falls on the first syllable. This is quite different from any other Formosan language, but it is not phonemic. There are two types of clauses. I think for anybody working on Austronesian language, that might be quite normal. The first type of clause is nominal. The second is verbal. And Mandarin is a predicate initial language. So the word order is relatively free. Predicate initial, that's important because we will look at the situation with Kaxabu in a minute. Word order can be VOS, VSO with no problem. What is interesting is that when you have a negative like this, then you see that what was originally the subject marked by the nominative is always before the object marked by the oblique. When you have two pronouns, it's more free. When you have two nouns, but what is interesting is that whether you have a noun or whether you have a pronoun, you need to have a genitive after the negative. So there used to be a lot of discussion about where the genitive comes from, and I will explain to you in a minute why. So what is important in Formosan languages is that you have a very complex voice system that corresponds to what we see in the Philippine languages, with different kind of voices, and each type of voice will choose a different kind of subject. So usually the subject is marked as nominative and the non-subject actor by the genitive, as you can see in these examples. So 7A will be, I ate some goat meat, will be, you see the agent actor, the actor voice and that refers to the aken, so the nominative subject, and so on and so forth. So what is interesting here is that whenever you have a non-subject actor, it's always marked by the genitive, but as you saw in Mandarin, when you have the negative, it is always marked by the genitive, but this negative sentence, actually, the subject is always the agent. So you don't have any problem of non-subject actor here. So this is what is also particular to Mandarin. In Mandarin, you don't have, and in Rukai in general, you have only active passive. So it goes quite like English. As long as you have a transitive verb, you can have the passive equivalent, but the passive is not that much used in actual situations in text. You don't see it that often. And it usually the Formosan languages are characterized by very complex case marking system, but in Mandarin we don't have. So the case markers have two different functions. The first is syntactic, they mark the grammatical relations. The second is semantic, it marks whether the noun is common or personal, referential, non-referential, plural, or non-plural. As you can see in Seisha here. So if you have a noun like Kokorin, the child, then you will have a noun common case marker, common noun case marker. But if you have a Mao, which is a personal noun, then you have another kind of marker. In Mandarin, that's not at all the case. You have no case marker at all, but you have this agreement system on the verb and the subject, which is quite interesting, I think, and I've written quite a lot on this issue. So let me go to Kaxabu. Kaxabu is completely different. It is spoken at the very center of Taiwan, and it is one of two dialects, Kaxabu Pasay or Pasay Kaxabu. And it is spoken in the western part of the Puli, whether Pasay is spoken in the no, is eastern part of Puli, whether Pasay is spoken in the western part. How did I start? Actually, it was quite occasional. I was working on site for a couple of years and close to Pasay. I had worked in Pasay before, but I never imagined I would work more in Pasay because it was sad that the last Pasay speaker had died in 2010. And then I met a student in Hungary, and I said, why don't you work on your MA thesis on Kaxabu? I was interested in looking at Kaxabu Pasay and the relation with Seisha, but then I realized it was really Moribund language that we had completely disregarded. So I convinced him to work on the PhD later on, and he finished his PhD in December 2022. And so Kaxabu has 16 consonants, among which 2 glide, 6 vowels. And interestingly, it has different syllable structure and stress and pitch. Syllable structures are quite like any other Formosan languages, but it has a kind of pitch that might be the result of its contact with Taiwanese Southern Min. It has also different kinds of closal types, nominal, verbal. But what is interesting is that it usually starts with the subject initially. So contrary to Rukai, where you see the verb in initial position, most of the time, and in text that's quite open, usually in Kaxabu you have it used to be a predicate initial language, but it is turning into a subject initial language. And this is, I think, because of the influence of Southern Min. It used to have a very complex, I think, voice system, the way we see it in other Formosan languages, but because of its heavily contact with Southern Min, also it has lost most of the focuses. Most of the affixes you see there. So I had 2 stars to show that it's not any abuse, but because we have remnant, we have fossilized vocabulary. So we know that it used to exist. We can still see it. What is even more important is that this language has been has been undergoing degrammaticalization. What does it mean? It means that whenever you have an affix, it might become a clitic, and whenever you have a uh, bisyllabic affix, it might become a word. So this is very interesting. The way they do it is actually introducing some phonemes like a glottal stop. So in Pase we have Bulakan, but in Kaxabu we will have Bulakan. And the speech also is completely different. So that show that they are, becoming more synthetic, a more synthetic language. And this is again under the influence of Southern Maine. So this is something I worked on, Paka, and you see here in 19 that you have two different ways of realizing the Paka suffix prefix. Paka can be Paka Tahayak, so it's really the prefix as we see it in any other Formosan language. But Pakayaku, here you see that Paka has been completely fossilized. It is dissyllabic, so it can be used as a word, meaning let, cause, whatever. And then you can have a noun, pronoun afterwards, it's completely free. And if you look at Taiwanese, if you know Taiwanese, you will see really a kind of couch between Kaxabu and Taiwanese. So when we do field work, we cannot go through Taiwanese to ask. We need to ask questions all in Kaxabu. Otherwise, they always do calc. Calcing is very, very, very common in Kaxabu. So, okay, so personal experience with researching and teaching these two languages, they I did work a long time on Mandarin. I persevered, I think, and because of different kind of programs or project I had, I did different things. So I worked on a grammar of Mandarin Rukai, but this was based on text I had collected with the first ever assistant I trained. So we had a full collection of texts, which are the memory of this the informant I have in the middle. And then I was asked to write grammars in Chinese and do different kind of work. These are the major three informant I had. In the village, if there are 300 people, most of the time this is a ghost village. You don't see anybody except for the elders with maybe their grandchildren, and you don't see anybody. And the problem is that if you go to people, they will just, ignore you. Not, they are not, it's not that they're not friendly, they just don't want you to, go into their village and do anything in their village. But if you go to any other village, Rukai village, they will say, why do you go to the next village? Why do you go to another village? So that's always a kind of situation where you don't really know what to do. So as I said, I was sent by a poly to work on that language for 1 year, and it was so difficult. I was wondering whether I should stay in that community, or whether I should go back to the Zou community. My informant's attitude was quite difficult to sometimes very difficult. Sometimes she was scorned by the neighbors, so she would just tell me, "You leave the village now," and I had to leave within the hour. So that was sometimes very difficult. Also, she used to say, "You're stealing our language." So this made me reflect that, oh, okay, so we're stealing the language. What does it mean? So I thought maybe if I train the people there, they won't say anymore, we are stealing the language. And that's how I started to reflect on, language training and how do we do that, to take back, as someone just talked about outsider's view and insider's view. And that's true that if we try to, be in the position where we give back to the village, maybe that's more easy. Ryuji, as something else, she didn't want me to do any recording. Can you imagine starting working in the language where she said, I can repeat 100 times, but you don't record anything. So no picture, no recording, nothing. And I had to start with the text. That was really very, very, very difficult. And also the Rukai, the Rukai have a difficult, the way they are, this group is actually still very controversial. And my first reaction was, oh, I know who Mandarin is grouped with. It is with the Tanan and Lakwan, who are spoken very in the eastern part. And probably said, do you understand the geography of the Rukai? they are in the eastern part, and you are telling me that those who are in the western part are close together. I said, yes, they are. And of course, he would not believe me. I've been trying to show this, and it has been 30 years now. I'm still trying to show that I'm right. So you can imagine how much difficult it is. Anyway, the grammar is quite aberrant. So I had a lot of challenges to write just the grammar. First, I had to speak in Chinese, but my informal Chinese 30 years ago was not. I mean, we both had quite a difficult Chinese, together. We could not converse as we wanted. Of course, I could not speak Rukai. I had to get used to the sounds of the language without any recording. I had to avoid, uh, taking too much, being influenced too much by what we had written on Pen and Rukai, put it in for or concept say some stories, but other were not able to say stories. So I had to as I said, I was often asked to leave the village. So it took me many years before I realized that instead of, because each time I was, chased from one village, I had to go to another village. And then I started collecting back and forth a lot of different kind of things, depending actually to compare anything when I had nothing to compare. So I decided I would work on that, like meta grammar. But it took me about 15 years before I could publish it. So it was an enormous amount of time. It took me quite some time to go into that and do it completely. And I just decided to go with the training of one student who was able to speak in Taiwanese, very good Taiwanese, and was working with that community, but at the beginning, not linguistically. It was just helping doing things. And I told him whether he would be willing, under my supervision, to do MA and then PhD. And this book has been published, this PhD has been published into 2 volumes. At the same time, middle high graduate, but she was willing to do with that old person who was 92 at the time, and she was able to draw the book and also to collect me, though she was raised in a family that speaks Salvamin and she could not speak Kaxabu, and the old man was, could not hear from one ear, but she has so much talent doing field work. I said, do not go through me, because otherwise it's going to, and she did not do that. Would she would ask him questions, and she would say, oh, maybe now you can tell me the same thing in Kaxabu, and she videotaped everything. So that was a book we published in 2018. Regarding the training and teaching, I started, as I said, in 1997 to teach one particular young from the village. You need to have textbooks. She not only said that the language, we were stealing her language, but the language was disappearing. She was a diamond. She wanted textbooks. So we did a series of 6 textbooks with different kind of level grading, the difficulties, with the last textbook being a thematic dictionary, as I had wanted to have when I was, starting with that assistant. We did not do this thematic dictionary. We did all the stories of my informant. And the data we collected helped us do the textbook, helped me also do the archive that is now closed, but we have all the data. And also, as I said, I attended all the, I'm working with the government when they are doing the exams, and my work is on Rukai in general. With Kaxabu, it was a completely different situation where I've not been teaching myself, but I've been teaching how to do research and do teaching. So once Ong Jingwen has this book she had drawn and written based on the Chinese Kaxabu New Year, she said she was going to teach, and I said, why don't you teach about your book? So she was redrawing, and she would, explain the story and explain everything in the story. And she's been invited in many places in the 4 villages to teach. And usually she asks my former PhD student to co-teach with her. So that's really giving a lot of I mean, they're become of their language. The one problem they have is that they have no recognition. They think they don't have any person that is able to apply. They fear that they might be, turned down if they make an application to be officially recognized. So they would like either Wong Tingwen or Lin Hongwei to be the people that make the application for them. And I said, no, this is not what the minister of the Council of Indigenous People said. They said the application needs to come from the people themselves. So this is where things are a little bit difficult. So there are social, political, and factors I would like to talk about. It has been 400 years since uh, since the Dutch came to Taiwan, and actually it has brought a lot of changes. So we can say they have been periods of changes. Originally, we don't really know how many languages there were, maybe 30, maybe 25. We don't know how many dialects there were. As you can see, Kaxabu was found in 1968, completely forgotten until 2014. So that tells us that maybe there were many other languages that were completely, not known or completely forgotten. When the Dutch came, they first made the recordings of 2 different languages. Siraya is one of them, and Favalang is they allowed Chinese migration to come in. And the Chinese first established themselves on the Western Plains, and doing that, they progressively, the Western Plains people were Sinicized. Western Plain peoples usually think that they were not Sinicized, that they were, they were forced to. I am not sure. We don't know about the exact history. As you said, maybe they felt marginalized, so they decided not to be, within that, to speak their language. I don't know. Then the Japanese came in. Taiwan was turned to the Japanese, and then that was the second great period of changes. There was a lot of uprising. So north and south, you see different things. In the Rukai, that was one of the last ethnic groups they went to control. And the Rukai remember the Japanese very well and in very good terms. They had very good ways of talking about that, the ways they educated them, and they are very happy. But in the north, for example, with the Seisha, for example, it's always difficult to speak about the Japanese because they have reminiscence of uprisings and movement of populations. So there were quite some repressions. And the language, there was some reorganization of the villages and disruption of the social cultural organization. So the Japanese also asked them to forget about some of their traditions, cultural practices, and language. But that was not as worse as when the KMT went into Taiwan, and at that time there was an arrival in mass of Westerners, but they forbade all the population to speak what they call the local languages. So you could not speak Taiwanese, you could not speak Hakka, you could not speak any Formosan language. You could only speak Mandarin Chinese. And because of the industrialization process and the economic growth, many people would leave the mountains to go into the urban areas. So their language, and what happened at that time was that they completely, decided they would not tell, they would not speak in their language to their children. So for me, I think there's a lost generation. It started about in 1960 and it went up to 1990. My own husband refused to speak in Taiwanese to my children, and when my daughter said, "I want to learn Amis," he said, "You say word." I said, "Because she prays to her, so she doesn't feel like she should learn Taiwanese, but both my children learn Taiwanese later on with their peers, and they can speak it, they can hear it. Though I think it's not as good as French and Chinese they have been speaking since they were very young. So that's another problem where this last generation they just decided not to speak in their language to their children. They just refused. In 1987, after a lot of there were some social activism, and of course the lift of the martial law. And what we see is that then it was slow because until the early 1990s, it was not good to be, for example, Aborigine. It was not, I mean, when I asked my assistant to come to Taipei, she would not say, oh, no, no, I'm not Aborigine. I'm not Rukai. I'm nothing. I'm just Taiwanese. So they would just refuse to say, I'm Aborigine. Now it's much better, but we have had also a lot of natural disasters that have also damaged some of the villages. So because of that, they have had also to move in other areas. So in brief, we have two different main periods where we have a lot of language shift and language change. The first period during the Japanese and the second period with the KMT and the martial law. But what happened is that even if the Japanese enforced the assimilation and also had education in Japanese and whatever, when they left Taiwan, the local languages were still spoken fluently. And what is they were transmitted to the next generation by the people. They didn't feel despised. They didn't feel anything like not being able to teach them to speak in their language. But when the KMT came at the end of 1987, what we see is that the elders could speak very well, but they would not transmit their language. And I think that was one of the main problem there. Now, Professor Iwasaki was talking about the role of social media and also literacy. I think what we did in writing system to all the Formosan languages, but instead of having one languages, I had been working on the Formosan archive, so I knew it was important to have exactly the same system. We decided to go with the dialects. So 44 dialects, 44 different writing system, if you want to say, though we're using the same kind of sounds. The sounds are not very difficult. So that's another problem. I think since we gave them the literacy, and we allowed them to learn about their writing system, things have we have gone bankrupt. I think we've lost the languages. So I would say we started to lose the languages in 2005. We thought we were trying to help with the exams, with the giving them a writing system. But what we did was complexify. I mean, standardizing, writing meant that some dialects have become much more prominent than others, and some writing are, transfiguring. I mean, changing completely the way the languages are spoken. So, just to give you an example, my Saisha don't like the A, with an accent. So they say back, but actually it is pronounced like B. So there's nothing like this. And in all the languages, the situation is very complex. In 1992, my main informant understood that her language would disappear. And once she realized I was going to train someone, she was very happy. She said, make textbooks. We did. But since the 2010s, the elders, who were only 30 or 40, so they were not my informants in the 90s, they denied, they do not know their language as well as the elders. So if ever I come in the village, I say where they don't understand, they say, oh, your Chinese is so bad. Then they reject their affiliation to the Rukai, and they don't like the preponderance of Budai, the other largest Rukai dialect, but they show very little interest when you say, then I'm going to, to train you, we can share, the workload and language revitalization, they're not interested. if they're interested, that's only for their own purposes, for recognition purposes, to become more powerful. You know, they are an ethnic group that has a hierarchy. They have nobles and they have commoners. So if you're part of the nobles, that's good. But if you're a commoner, that's not good. And they're using this kind of thing, like revitalization process, to acquire power they might have lost before. So this is very complex. So whenever I go in the society, in the ethnic group, I just have to listen. I can't say anything, even when they say, "Oh, your Chinese is so bad. We don't understand what you're talking about." Why I know they don't understand what I'm speaking in Mandarin, you know. So I think, well, anyway, that's the way it is. Of course, I continue to be chased away from the village regularly. In 2017, 2017, it was in war. They said, we're going to split up the Rukai ethnic group, so you should help us. I said, no, I'm not going to help. This is your job, not mine. And they said, then don't go back to our village. So I received usually a lot of threats. That's make it very difficult, you know, to work and to do anything, but I'm trying my best. In the Kaxabu, I was always welcome. I mean, they welcome anybody willing to work with them. And that old man I showed you the picture of was such a wonderful man. When he understood that we were really trying to, you know, take his, I mean, when his memory of his language went back, he was so happy. He would speak a lot during the presentation of the book. He spoke for half an hour without stopping. But now that it has died away, and all the people that worked, you know, on preservation of these languages also passed away, outsiders are not as welcome as they used to be. I think the last time was when my assistant Wang Qingwen and my former student Liu Hongrui were asked to make, you know, the appeal of becoming, you know, a distinct tribe and distinct ethnic group, and when I said, no, this is not a job. I feel that they fear failure. So they think they are not, you know, able to do anything towards that. But at the same time, they are asking the outsiders to do it for them. And I think that's not our role. I think we should help, but we cannot do more. And what I see also, the last time I was in the village was competitions among the 4 villages where Kaxabu is spoken or maintained. It's not spoken in daily life, but maintained. Like Wen Jingwen is asked by different villages to do exactly the same thing. So she wrote another book for another village, and then the oh, you should add a section on the Kaxabu New Year. I said, but that's another book. That's not the topic of New Year assigned for that book. So I know that there are competition among languages. And that's the end of my talk. And thank you for the
Thank you, Dr. Zeitoun, for very interesting talk and your hard work, amazing work on Formosan languages documentation.
Oh, yeah, let me say, for my hard work on Formosan languages, I was granted the Taiwanese nationality in 2006. The Rukai said, well, if you don't accept, you know, ours, so I had different things.
That's wonderful. Okay, so we have about 10 minutes for Q&A. Any questions from the in-person audience, and then we will also accommodate questions from the online audience. Yes.
Thank you, Elizabeth, for your endurance and courage. Commendable. Of the many important things you said, one that struck me as particularly relevant to this symposium was the fact that the parents, the adults refusing to speak the language of the children. That very same point arose in the article on Japanese that was distributed before meeting. And the reverse, with the children refusing to speak to the parents in the indigenous language, is also very common. In fact, just last week, I heard an anecdote in Hawaii about a child coming home from Hawaii immersion program, and mom speaks to him in Hawaiian, and the child says, "Speak English, this is not school." A very discouraging anecdote. But I fear that this is happening more and more around the world, and that it's something we have to try to address going forward.
Yeah, when I started to train my own assistant, because my informant has said we were stealing the language. So originally that was just a response to that, stealing the language. I realized how much important it was, because as I said, when she went to Taipei, she would say she would, and suddenly I realized, wow, there's really a problem of how you're being. So at that time, I used to go every day to the council. At that time, it was called Council of Regional Affairs, now the Council of Indigenous Peoples. And I used to tell them, give me people, and I will train them. I will show them how much beautiful their language is. Though I prefer so, I must admit that each of the languages I've been working on, each completely different from the other, and all very interesting. So, but at that time, they gave me a 2-year project, and all the people have been training at that time, maybe except 2 or 3, are now either missionaries, either working in, teaching themselves or doing revitalization work. So I thought, and they are all in their 40s, 50s, early 50s, and I thought that's working well. But it's just whether the government would consider this important or not. And I think the government, it took them time to realize that was something to do. And it didn't come from the linguist. It actually came from the ethnologist. So in response, when I was trying to say we should train, they would not say you're wasting money. But when the ethnologists started to say we should do, a textbook, we should do this and that, then the linguists thought, wow, they are doing this? No, they are not going to. So there was some kind of conflict between different skills adequate at that time. But when you're living history and when you're so young, you don't know how to, what to do. They tell you, no, that's wrong. No, that's so you can just do it, but at the same time, it's very difficult to respond. And in Taiwan, in particular, I found it very, very difficult.
One question from the online changes in the reading. Yeah.
Okay, so the question reads, how do you view these revitalization efforts in light of the Bilingual Nation 2030 policy? The Taiwanese government wants to have the appearance of promoting multilingualism in so-called mother tongues, but yet their newest language policy points more towards English/Mandarin dominance.
In Taiwan, I think our new president, starting from this month on May 20th, has been one of the advocates of using English, and they want to make Taiwan in 2030, bilingual nation, English and Chinese. And I think that's, of course, very bad for all the endangered language. And that's giving the wrong signal, of course, because you're telling us, so I've been trained, even when we start talking about that in our institute, we were saying, but we have never been colonized by the English, but we're let them, colonizing the community. And we are trying to explain that English should be learned and should be used, but it should be an English-friendly environment rather than two languages, English and Chinese. Also, it goes against what the government enacted as, in 2018, there was this law of national languages. So 20 languages are recognized, including TSL, the Taiwan Sign Language. English is not one of them. So how can we explain that? So there's a lot of things. I hope that the new president will not go into enforcing, English as the next, language already. I think many of the children are not, willing to learn the local languages, but rather want to learn, English, and that's really a problem. But I think that might be a problem also elsewhere in the world,
Oh, and then And then, Professor, go ahead. Next.
On the standardization and prescriptive things may cause some loss of dialects. But since there are so many dialects in one language, so if we like putting more efforts to different dialects, it seems the limited resources will be even more diversified. So is there anything we can do? I mean, standardization or no standardization, or there's a trade-off, compromise. What's your opinion?
You need to tell that to the people. And if you tell them, well, you see, your dialect is not important, I don't think they will be very happy. You see this, what happened with the Siraya was this, the second gospel was found out into 2020. And suddenly you realize that the language that is dormant at this moment, Siraya, is not Siraya, but Taiwan. Something which is thought to be another close dialect or maybe close language. None of the language has been able to say to the Siraya, do you know that you don't speak Siraya, but you're speaking Taiwan? Can you imagine their reaction? So we've been doing workshops where we are alerting them that maybe there might be something wrong, but how can we, say that? It's even more difficult if you go to somewhere and you tell them your language doesn't seem that important as that language. But it happened, like Hanxi, Haiyayu, the Creole Hanxi has been completely, forgotten, so not included into the exam. I think that's really a situation we need to think about. So I would say first make the documentation of as many languages we can, as many dialects we can, and then the people decide not to speak it, but we are not the one that impose on them anything.
My question, actually, you already, discussed this, just now. And also, Sengen will talk about the situation in Taiwan this afternoon. So we'll have more time to talk about, how language policy in Taiwan will look like in the future. But another related question is that I know that you've been working on Formosan languages for many years. How many other people, and you've been, training younger, scholars, but how many people are working to document these languages? Do you have enough people working on these languages? And if not, is there anything that can be done?
So I calculated we have about 60 people, including scholars, teachers at universities, students. But if we really want to count out of these 60 people, they come and go, only 20 are working on the Formosan languages. In my generation, I think we're only 2 doing still fieldwork. So that shows you if you're not doing fieldwork, then how can you collect enough data, enough stories, enough whatever? And in my generation, I think I'm the only one who have trained so many people. Actually, teachers maybe at university might be able to teach, but it's one thing to say you teach, and then it's one thing to say you train. And training and teaching is completely different. It took me 800 hours to to train my PhD students, to understand that there were a lot of Minayu into the Kaxabu. He would not say it. He speaks Minayu very, very well. He could say it, maybe he could not say it, and it takes time, to understand, to be familiar with the languages. So not that many. And I'm trying actually to give classes in all the world to attract the attention of people. I think if the Taiwanese can't see how marvelous these languages are, maybe the people outside will see that and they will come. So this is why I was in France last month to also give classes on these Formosan languages.
We have one question from Daniel.
Yeah, you mentioned that the Rukai people show very little interest in language revitalization other than for recognition purpose. I wonder if you can tell us more about if you see any ways to make that country where both states are more consistent ecosystems.
Any ways to attract them?
Yeah, or make them more cash.
That's extremely difficult. If you know, if they tell you, I mean, the best advocate is the assistant I trained. She's the best advocate, but even her, she has a lot of difficulties. Telling people, she has about revitalization of their language. Her own children are very young. One I think is 9. She is taking classes on Min. She chose Min as the language. She asked me whether that was okay. I say, why not? Because our father is Taiwanese. So, it as what Ray said, you can't decide us all for the children. So each of us have to choose a language. I don't know what to say. Yeah, no, I know. In 2017, I was asked to go to the parliament. I was asked by the president of Academia Sinica. I was told to say that doing archives is not the role of Academia Sinica. I thought that was funny because I had spent 12 years working on the Formosan language archives with funds from Academia Sinica. So I thought, well, they changed the president and all, they changed their policies. But when I arrived in the parliament, they saw me, they were very happy to see a foreigner. So they said, well, you're going upstairs. I should not have gone on stage. And then they say, what do you think about our law? The 20 national languages. I thought, if tomorrow I'm going to be evicted from Academia Sinica, I better tell the truth. So I said, well, as long as you don't respect these people and you don't tell them how much beautiful their cultures and their language is, they're not going to learn it. And I still think so many years afterwards that unless they identify themselves in their language, in their cultures, otherwise they're not going to, learn it. So you have to tell people how much beautiful it is to be, different. But for the Taiwanese, this is a concept that they can't, even my daughter can't accept to be different. They need to be all the same. So I don't know if you've been in Taiwan, but for them, this is a concept they can't accept. And it takes time. I mean, they usually say, well, you can be different. You're a foreigner. Yeah, yes. And also have decided, even as a Taiwanese, to be different. But that means that you risk to be, at the outskirts of the society and that you hear a lot of criticism. But maybe that's the price to pay to, enforce certain things.
Thank you. Well, I'm sorry I have to end this discussion now in the interest of time. Thank you. Let's